welcome to the CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Collecting Cars podcast. Today, with me, my usual partner in crime, Edward Lovett, and also David Clark, who is about as embedded in the world of old cars and old car racing as anyone on the planet. And, for me, most impressively, was the man who, back in the day, attempted to sell a car called the McLaren F1. And I'm partly got him here today just to tell us all about that adventure, but also a broader conversation around old cars, driving, and the passion we have for those subjects. David, welcome to Gerardo & Co.
Thank you very much.
Coffee good?
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
It's Max's, isn't it? It's going to be good.
Love it. Yes.
So, back in the early 90s, those of us that read the motoring media heard about this car, that Gordon Murray was designing the ultimate street car. And I remember seeing the first pictures of it, sort of 92, 93, the mules. Yeah. And then I remember May 94's edition of Car Magazine when they drove it. And the numbers even now just trip off the tongue. £627,000 or whatever it was. And the power figures and the acceleration. How on earth did you sell them? We were on the back of a global recession. And suddenly you've got this piece of unobtainium that you've got to try and sell. How did it work?
I think a lot of it was that people didn't really understand the car or the price of it in those days. I mean, today it's an insignificant the price of cars today. But the reason I did it, I just loved the whole thing with Gordon because I was friendly with some people at McLaren. I just really, really wanted to do the project. So the whole lead up with Gordon and the way he did everything was, it just filled you with enthusiasm. I remember the Kenwood people that sort of came in every 3 months to bring these speakers in for the car. And Gordon had these old brass scales and he would put the speakers on the scales, and you go, no, they're too heavy. And they'd all go, oh. And one day, Gordon said, the guys from Kenwood are coming in. I said, I've got to be there. Okay, so they came into his office, and they developed this speaker, especially for the F1, without a magnet, which was mega, mega light. And they got extremely excited because it passed Gordon's test. You know, I think he was dressed in a poncho that day or something. And so a lot of that was the sort of fun of it. And, you know, just the way, like, just developing the windscreen wiper was done in a fairly archaic way. Because the first time, you know, they developed a road car. And basically everyone was left to their own devices there. So it was like a bit of a boys' club because it wasn't connected directly to the Grand Prix factories.
So how many were there supposed to be built? Was it supposed to be an unlimited run, or was it always going to be, this is the number we're building?
Okay, well, someone decided they would build a limited run of 350.
Of which they built?
So, 122, was it? 126, yeah. So
have they still got the chassis numbers hanging around a bit like
continuation.
JLR? Are they going to start?
A continuation F1.
Yeah.
No, sadly, boys, no.
They'll appear.
Because if anyone would know about it, David, you would.
They're not available. Could be in the book.
Were you how long before they delivered a car had you started working with them?
Ooh,
so were you responsible for the sale of the first car?
Yeah, well, a lot of the first cars were ordered. You know, the thing all started in Monaco, where they presented the car, which was not a car in any way,
shape. Was that 93 or 92?
92, I think it was,
yeah.
Which was not a car in any way, shape or form. It was just an Ultima with a bit of old plastic, but everyone thought it was marvellous.
Yeah.
So, people, you know what it's like, even in those days, a few people ordered one. Not like today where 100 people go, I've got to have two and all that sort of stuff.
How many people, sort of 20 people, do you think?
Yeah, maybe not that. So then it became, I think the first thing I said when I got there was, you know, the first thing we need to do is get out of 350 engines. To which certain people said, no. I said, well, yes, but you're never going to sell 350 cars. Not in your lifetime anyway. Probably would today. But so the negotiation out of the engines became quite a big thing. And
Because BMW had tooled up, had they, to build...
absolutely.
Yeah.
So it really sort of
So
culminated.
they still got some bits left over?
No, I bought them all. It was the most weirdest thing. One of the guys who I knew from the day rang up and said, oh, they've asked me to call you and see if you want to buy the parts. I said, yeah, okay, you authorised to sell them? He said, yeah, I'm still at BMW. Oh, okay, fine. Can you make an offer? Well, okay. So I did. So they called me the next day and said, that's okay, fine. We'll send you the invoice. I mean, thousands of parts. And I said, is that delivered? They said, yes. So big truck arrived with an enormous amount of parts. So I've still got them.
You're joking.
No.
That is amazing.
Yeah,
And
I've still got
what
them.
have you got? Have you got a block, or have you got?
Yep, got all that.
And you're just you're
Yeah.
waiting. You're waiting.
Yeah. It's for a rainy day, I suppose. Yeah, I can't leave it too long. But
What a pension.
yeah,
Do you ever go and look in it or not?
yeah, I do. Yeah,
Are they in a room now or something? Or
yeah. You can
And,
see,
and these road car parts, not race car parts.
and some race car parts,
Yeah.
but there's very little difference.
Yeah.
There's very little difference. Yeah.
Well, you need a
hence,
few
and-
more Rowans owning the cars because
Yeah,
you'd need
yeah.
a lot more repairs.
The trouble is, the engines are so amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I remember going with Gordon to see Paul Rocha, and Gordon said, well, the first thing we have to do is drink some beer. I went, okay. All right, so there's this awful stuff called Weiss beer. Well, I didn't like it anyway.
Cloudy beer.
Yeah. So we had about 6 pints of that, and then we did this whole thing with Rocha, and I flew back to Gordon, and I said, Gordon, this is never going to happen. Yeah, well, I said, no, this has to go before the board. This is a big, big thing. Anyway, it happened quite quickly with Carbfeld and Rocha, and the engine just evolved. It could never happen today, I don't think, in the way that it did. But and it was great. The first when they tested the engine, it was in a M5 estate car, which BMW still have.
Brilliant.
So somewhere there is an M5 with
That
a
is the
McLaren
Chris
F1
Harris dream car.
That's it. Yeah, I've driven it. It's an outrageous thing, but so that was the first sort of. But it didn't really need any development.
Sorry, I'm nursing a bit of a trouser tent here after hearing that. That is the dream car, isn't it?
Yeah.
God Almighty.
Do you want to go and relieve yourself?
I mean, that is but they must have made a loss, wasn't they, BMW, doing that?
I think, you know, in the end, McLaren didn't. I mean, they were, I think when I went there, on a big loss. But part of the engine negotiation, we encompassed the touring car program. So we did the BMW touring car program, which helped. So,
Yeah.
so we basically got out of the engines. And there are hardly any engines at all.
Really?
Yeah. I know someone that's got two, but
So how many blocks have you got?
can't remember now. But I've got two engines.
You've got two engines.
Yes, yes.
And you sold the car, didn't you? Because you had the Harrods,
Harrods
car.
car,
You
yeah.
had, which was the one that everyone wanted.
Yeah, I had it for 18 years. I just don't think anyone will ever use a McLaren like that ever again. I don't think, because I used it all the time. You know, when I'd pitch up here in it, but I used to love the remarks of people. You know, the sort of pilgrimage to Le Mans. You get all these people. And I was driving to McLaren actually, and it was quite wet, and was driving just out of Knightsbridge, and there was this transit van, and he kept hooting me, and I thought, oh God, and I had sliding windows on mine, and this guy went, mate, that's a dog's bollocks. I was there at Le Mans. I said, great, that's terrific, thank you very much. Yeah, so the stuff, yeah, I loved it.
Do you miss it?
Yeah, enormously. But I've had my time, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't want to drive it. He called me the other day. He said, you know, you can always drive it. I don't want to drive it again.
Yeah, it's a bit like the ex-girlfriend, isn't it? You
Yeah, I
moved
just
on.
don't want to do it. I've done it. I've loved it. I didn't really have anything done to it hardly over 18 years. Hardly touched the car over 18 years.
So the sales process, because
Yes.
there are some apocryphal tales about how this worked, and some of the inverted commas test drives that people were invited on. So you went to Woking
Yeah.
and said, I'd quite like to buy one of these. Did you show them what was going on, how advanced the
Yeah.
project was? Did you show them a tub? Because obviously it was in the media, we were aware that they were using technologies that were new to road cars, but none of us had any idea quite how advanced the thing was. I don't think behind the scenes, because they drip fed some of the information, but not all of it.
There was a certain person at McLaren had a paranoia about journalists. And he didn't interfere that much, but he interfered with the journalists. So it was very difficult getting, people along. I mean, I had the total opposite thing, is get them all, the friendly journalists along.
Yeah.
And, like with Jeremy, I mean, because, Tiff tested the car.
The TIFF film at Goodwood
Yeah.
was eye-opening, really.
Yeah, it was cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just thought this thing bucking and weaving, this sense of this bloke hanging on for dear life, because
Yes.
it has so much power.
Yes.
Was that, even now, sticks with me. That
Yeah,
film.
he did a cool job there, I think, Chris. But personally, I thought should have had a lot of journalists there in a more of a friendly environment.
Do you think you'd have sold more cars?
I just think it would have been a warmer thing, that's all. And I think it would have got maybe some better media coverage.
Yeah. Is it true, and we can cut this out if you want to, is it true that some of Mr. Palmer's test drives were quite interesting for earlier potential customers?
I think that's true.
I have some sympathy. If you're given a car with 620-something horsepower to demonstrate to a punter, you're probably going to use some of that power, aren't you? And it might be quite alarming for that punter, because they're probably not used to it.
Yeah, I think there are two Jonathans, to be honest. There's the guy in the car and the guy not in the car. And as he will freely admit, one of the biggest reasons he bought a helicopter was because of the way he drives on the road and everything. And he'll admit that. And so there was, I think, one of the best things, to be honest, in that vein was we decided to do a sort of little world tour, but mainly Japan. So we sent the car to Japan.
Because that's back end of the Japanese economy booming, wasn't it?
Yeah,
They were
correct.
buying all the cars.
Yeah, so I thought we'd send it to Japan, and it would be at Suzuka, and people could see it at Suzuka, and Bernie was going to let us take the car around the circuit, which he also did at Adelaide.
Was Ayrton alive at this point? Was Ayrton still alive at this point? He was, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was. Or was he not? No, maybe he just...
No.
Is it 25? It's 25 years today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was May 94, and the car was launched around then, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So Gordon and I went, so anyway, the car had arrived, a few of the guys said, yeah, the car's here. And so Gordon and I, we arrived at Suzuka, and we were just sort of walking up like a bit of a hill, and the further we walked, the more we could sort of see the car. And I said to Gordon, car looks a bit strange. Yeah, well, it does really, doesn't it? The further we walk, oh, well, what's happened? Someone's crashed it. I went, you're right. So anyway, it was fairly badly damaged. So what happened was Ron decided, who cannot drive, to save his life. Strangely, took Gerhard round the circuit. Had a big off, no helmets. Gerhard had an egg on his head, so there was a possibility he couldn't do the Grand Prix because
his team principal had offed him.
So I couldn't help myself. So that evening, Ron decides to go on the full sort of defend myself thing. So there was Gerhard, there's about 20 people there, and they were having a go at Ron. He said, look, I haven't said this before because of the product, but what happened is that Gerhard pulled the handbrake on. I thought, I can't help myself. I said, you know what, Ron? The handbrake doesn't work on the car. Which it didn't. So we got it repaired, flew it back out to Japan, and did some very unusual demonstrations. We did one at 3 a.m. in a sort of pleasure park, fairground, where the guy wanted the car driven around. We didn't see him. He just wanted to observe, but we weren't to meet him. And then we had to drive the car all around the place, and
Because he lurked on the 14th floor and watched it. or something.
whatever. Yeah. So he felt he loved it, and he'd have to have one. But
And he did have one.
And then he did have one.
So how many cars sold to Japan?
I think in the end, it was probably about 12 cars.
Okay.
Yeah,
Biggest single market, or the Middle East was bigger? I suppose, wasn't
No, Middle East was nothing.
it? Back then it wasn't.
No, there was a couple.
Kuwait, there was money.
There was a couple of cars, but they were kept in Europe.
Brunei must have been one of the biggest single markets.
That's another thing. Yeah, that was quite a big market. Brunei, that was an experience.
Family podcast, David.
Just a nice little story about Brunei. Most of the driving was done at about 2 a.m. They had this enormous area called Jeradong Park with millions of fairy lights on everything. It's a bit like Michael Jackson on acid. And they have about 12 houses, all numbered. You know, house 1, house 2, and, you know, there were all various bits of entertainment in the houses, but all the driving was done, so cars would be delivered to this house for driving or that house for driving, and, you know, and lots of cars would arrive because, you know, there's over 3,000 cars there. So that the excitement was really short-lived. Because the next day, another lot of cars arrived.
It sounds like a sort of Truman Show almost.
Well, it was, but we stayed in this sort of hotel they had there, and but the drink was fantastic because there was Gordon, myself, and Crichton Brown, and the waiters were fabulous because when we wanted beer, they would have a big teapot, that was full of cold beer. But they'd rush in the restaurant going, oh, it's so hot. Oh, it's so hot. And that was our cold beer. So they'd pour this beer out, and that was great, actually. Yeah, it was great. Anyway.
So which single chassis did you sell the most times? Because you've been involved, you're still the go-to man for an F1, aren't you? If someone wants to know where an F1 is, I think you'd be the first person someone would phone.
Yeah, I know a few are, but I think other people, like always, have come into it and created an interest. And there's a lot of really good people around with enormous knowledge.
Yeah.
Extraordinary knowledge of them. So,
but you must have sold the same car 2 or 3 times.
I think I have, yeah. Yeah, I think I have. I mean, at one point, and when I was in the Mews just off Belgrave Square, I had a M14, M19, 2 road car F1s, GTR, and an LM. And
what was the cheapest they got to? So sort of late 90s, when people were just scared of the cost of them, and
cheapest they got to was about 350.
Sorry, can you just say that again?
£350,000
for a McLaren F1.
Well, they're only a smidge over that now.
What are they now?
Yeah, a little bit.
What are they now? What are they now?
I think a bit more than that.
Are they 10 million quid now? Or are they?
I think they're
bit
more
more than
actually. Yeah. I think
$18+.
Yeah.
And you could have bought one for £350,000.
you could have done.
I still remember walking up Park Lane as a kid
With the one in the showroom?
Yes, in the one in the showroom, and that car was sold to a young guy from Singapore.
That's in the UK.
Yeah, no, but the one that was in the UK in the showroom on
yeah.
Park Lane, that was sold to a young guy who was a student at the time in Ascot from Singapore, and then he stuck it in the RM auction.
That's right.
And I think it sold 680. Was it 680,000?
He was great, wasn't he? He came up to me drunk. He's from Houston, and he said, "I'm going to buy this car, but I feel I need 2." And I was standing with a few people, and I said, "Have as many as you want," I said. And anyway, he sat down and just absolutely, I mean, he raised the bid, I can't remember how much, by an enormous amount, shouted, and I think RM were pretty worried about him. Anyway, he paid, and he did end up having 2. He did end up having, he bought another one as well.
So you could have bought McLaren F1 for less money than a 911R is going for now.
Yeah.
It takes a moment for that to sink in that they got that cheap.
Should that be encouraging for 911R owners?
No, because that is an overinflated market still. But what drove the price down so far? I know market conditions, global economy, all that sort of stuff. But were people just scared of it?
I think people were scared of the price. They were scared of the marketplace, and a couple of them got bought for $350 and then sort of put away for a while.
Just imagine if you were the bloke that sold. I mean, people take the mickey out of me for selling a 993 GT2 for 150 grand, which is obviously smarts, and it's a regular laughing point over coffee for my friends. But that's different gravy. $350 for an F1.
Yeah. But I think, I'm not saying I knew it was going to be what it is today, but I always felt that it was going to be an iconic car.
You just look at points in history, don't you, about what's significant, and it was always going to be the modern 250 GTO because it had the narrative, the idea of McLaren, a racing entity, handing the greatest F1 designer of his era a blank piece of paper and saying make a road car. So you've got the story, then you've got the racing car, so it goes off and wins everything. So that's a really important part of the story.
Yeah, that was a really important time. Was the racing. I think that really boosted the sale of the car.
Did you sell the race cars as well?
Yeah. We sort of devised a package. I don't know about you. I quite like a package. I don't want one guy doing this, another guy doing that. So we had this whole package, which included a spares truck and technical support and, a lot. So I think that helped the sale of the car. And sort of tongue-in-cheek, I decided you couldn't buy a race car unless you bought a road car.
Did you manage to get that through?
Yeah.
You can't have this one unless you have one of those.
Yeah, well, I tried to put it in a different way, but it ended up as
David started the modern Ferrari situation.
And on that note, we're going to end part one there, and we're going to come back, and hopefully I can put on my rose-tinted spectacles and remember the first time I ever sat in a McLaren F1, which was when I was much younger, more hirsute, and David took me for a ride in one at the Long Cross test track. See you in a minute. Collecting Cars, the safe, smart and simple way to buy and sell collectible cars. An online auction platform for the UK and Europe. Follow us on Instagram at Collecting Cars and also collectingcars.com.
The CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Welcome back to part two of this Collecting Cars podcast with myself, Chris Harris, that's at Harris Monkey, Edward Lovett at Edward Lovett, and David Clark at Mac F1. We were discussing a minute ago that not many people can carry off that handle. That's like calling yourself Jesus, really, isn't it, David? But you can do it because you were so involved in the project. And we were going to meander off and talk about other things, but before we do that, we've still got some F1 stuff to chat about. Give us, please, a customer anecdote. Go on. A collection, a whoopsie, or something that made you giggle at the time.
I think one person that's very at the forefront of my mind, I met this guy who was a very, very sort of softly spoken guy, not from the UK, that said he was interested in the F1. And anyway, came to the factory and we gave him the whole sort of sales pitch and everything else, and he said, "Oh, thank you very, very much." A very gentle guy, and he left. And Crichton Brown, who's no longer with us sadly, but Crichton thought everyone was marvellous, and he said, "I think he'd buy a car." Yeah, absolutely, Crichton. Write a letter to him because he loved writing letters. Any chance he'd write a letter, Crichton. And anyway, a couple of weeks later, this guy said, "Oh, could I come down again?" I said, "Yeah, fine." And anyway, he sat in the office and he said, "Look," he said, "my father, when I was at Cambridge, he bought me a house. So I have a house in Cambridge. And to buy this car, which I want because I love it so much, the only way I can do it is to sell the house." I said, "Well, you better do that. I've got an estate agent." I said, "Get on the phone and sell it." And he did. Okay, and that's how he bought that's how he bought the car.
He sold his house?
Yeah, he sold a house that he had in Cambridge to buy the car. And
that was probably a good decision.
It was, yeah.
Do you reckon that house is worth 12 million quid?
So he's done a good deal there. But he bought it because he loved it. So which was good. But we had a quite a unusual customer from Germany that he used to have these points on the Autobahn, and every month he would test the car and he'd have acceleration and top speed in gears, and if it didn't comply to the actual figures of when he bought the car, he would come back and so this whole thing went on, which didn't really do much for Gordon. Anyway, one day he went in the mountain and rang me and started shouting, and I'm so embarrassed and this is ridiculous and I want to send the car back and get rid of it. I said, well, okay, what's the problem? He said, well, the car won't start. I said, well, look, I'm not saying you've done this, but sometimes when you get out of the car and go across the passenger seat, if your foot goes under the dashboard, there's a little red, little cutout button there. To which he abused me and said, don't call me an idiot, and don't. I said, okay, well, I won't say anything else. I'll send a helicopter to pick you up, take you where you're going. The only thing is, I said, if you have done what you've done, which I'm sure you haven't, I said, you pay for the helicopter. Of course, but it's not a question. I said, okay, fine. So we sent a couple of guys there. I said, look, the first thing you do,
He's definitely kicked it.
Yeah. I said, just land. Don't look at the button before you go. Fly him off, okay? And then let's have a look at it. So they called me up and said, yeah, kick the button. I said, okay, that's fine. And because then he was upset because he was at this sort of resort in the mountain and wanted his car. Which he eventually got, and kept the car, to be fair to him, for a long time.
Was this there was a story that used to go around that someone was complaining about a noise in their car at 200 odd miles an hour on the Autobahn? It was him, was it?
That's him.
He plugged it in and said it was hitting 230 miles an hour regularly on the Autobahn.
Oh, I think I know who this is. Yeah, okay, I think I know who this person is.
Yeah.
I've worked it out now.
Yeah, that's...
well, I mean, it had performance unlike anything else, though, didn't it?
Yeah.
That sense that it could accelerate from 100 to 200 miles an hour in 20 seconds, which was a number that always stuck in my head. Now, people that consume modern motoring media just don't know how lucky they are, because even though there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that is not worth watching, there is an amazing archive of stuff now. If you want to go and see what a Miura looks and sounds like, you can. You couldn't in our day, could you? You had to read... a Doug Blaine or a Steve Cropley, or you had to read these people describe what it was like. There was no video.
Yeah.
And that was what it was like for me in an F1. And I was sort of road test ashtray or whatever I was called at Autocar magazine in the late 90s. And I'd seen one F1 at a motor show. And I was down at Longcross, or Chobham as we called it, which is where we'd go and do cheap skids and fire M3s sideways to make exciting cover shots. And David's crew were still servicing F1s. The sales were gone, weren't they then? You'd done them, but they'd come back for a service. You'd PDI them there, wouldn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Take them around,
everything there.
Yeah.
Everything, yeah.
Which, looking back, was a preposterous place to do it because there was so much stuff to hit.
Yes. Yeah.
Just trees and obstacles everywhere.
Yes.
And I've always felt that if you don't ask, you don't get in life. And I'd never been in one of these things, and I didn't know David at all. I just saw a bloke with an F1 and thought, well, you've got to ask, haven't you? So I went over and said, please, can I have a ride in your F1? And he very kindly went, yeah, okay. And I was, 22, 23. And he took me out in the thing. And we went, I remember him accelerating down the back straight. And everything that I'd read about this car was very powerful. I'd read Bulgin write about it. I'd read all my favourite writers had written very emotive words about this thing, and particularly the noise it made. Noise is a very interesting thing as a journalist because you can describe it in quite an emotional way, and you can really get across the sense of the noise and the volume and the qualities of it. But when he accelerated, this inlet track that goes over your head when you're in one of the side seats, the passenger seats, this induction hammer that you get as the 12 cylinders go is unlike any other car noise.
Yeah,
it is extraordinary. When you open the taps up, I remember thinking, right, okay, this is even better than expected. Yes. I couldn't believe what it was like.
Yes.
So belatedly, thank you, because it just made me realise how special the car was.
Yeah. Still, I still get that feeling today when I drove one recently, a road car, and I don't know any of us, how a buzz we get in a car for a long time. We see a car and we get a real buzz out of driving it, but to have that sort of buzz throughout your life for a long period. I mean, I still get that, even though I've driven a lot of F1s. And
I think if you become tired of the F1 experience, you probably time to peg out. Hand over your atoms to someone else. But it also informed in me the sense that if I'm in something flash that doesn't belong to me, and a little person comes up and says, "Can I have a ride in it?" If I've got a minute, I always will, because that experience affected me, and I thought, God, that I would never have got in that car if you hadn't said yes. Yeah. And so now, if someone stops me and says, "Can I have a go in your car?" Obviously, the world's a bit different now. As long as I don't come across as being too sinister, then I'll take them for a ride in it, because I just think there's no substitute for actually being in it. You can have all the POV videos you want, all the YouTube videos, but it's never quite the same as being in it.
I think it's important for me. I was never too precious with it. So, like, we went for a ride, but we used to do that to a lot of people. And or if you were a customer, you might sort of have the car for a couple of hours or something, which I think at the time was quite unusual thing to do.
It's like handing them a loaded gun.
Yeah, but I think people, people like that. I think they like people became...
I think we were talking about it earlier. It's the biggest shame of today that these amazing cars that are built aren't used. They're treasured.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people. The George Harrison thing was a fantastic thing, and because everyone was invited just to come to the factory whenever they want, mainly to see their car being built, was, I think, a great thing. And George, he was there every week. Every week.
He'd pop down, would he?
Oh yeah, every week he'd come. And he was really into the whole thing. And for the colour, he rang me up, he said, "Oh, I'm not sure about the colour." I said, "Okay, George." He said, "Well..."
What had you gone for?
Well, he said, "Look, could I ask you, could you go and buy some aubergines? But don't buy the aubergines all at one shop, because they might all be the same." I said, "Okay."
Weird conversations you thought you'd never have in your life.
Yeah. So we got all these aubergines, and I never said to one of the guys, I said, "Look, we need to polish the aubergines. Okay, we'll have to the aubergines all lined up." And he came down, everyone loved him obviously, but and he came down and chose his specific aubergine colour, which is the colour of his car. Yeah. And the colour of the paint was exactly...
So if that's aubergine, what was Rowan Atkinson's car was more red in it?
Yeah, more burgundy. Yeah. More burgundy in it, yeah.
I found the fact that there was such a familiar face as Rowan Atkinson knocking about in one of these things utterly captivated me as a child as well.
Well, he drove it all the time.
Yeah,
I loved it. I just loved the idea that he would just be out and about driving this piece of unobtainium. Again, it just totally captivated me.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's a great thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, I mean, a guy in Japan did 20,000 miles in one, which is not easy in Japan.
Was it a pair of single Vanos M36s, Siamese, together or not?
I think it
was. Is that unfair?
I don't know, but I think conceptually that's the way. I think that's the way it started. I think the engine's a bit more than that, but I think the original sort of idea was that, and it is. And that whole Vanos system they had on was amazing, because when you do the demo, you can go through every gear on tickover, and then you can just accelerate to 230 mile an hour if you wish, which was quite an impressive part of the demo.
Yeah,
I say so myself.
The torque and the breadth of it.
Yeah. I did it recently, but
I'm going to just go off at a tangent slightly here quickly. Racing cars. Every time I go to a race meeting, certainly this continent, you're there. A historic meeting, classic cars. You do lots of racing. You own some lovely cars and drive them wonderfully. What's your thoughts on real versus replica? And increasingly we feel that some of the cars that are out there aren't the actual cars. I have a particular view on this, and I'm fascinated on your view on it.
It takes me, but I'm quite friendly with Max Mosley, and I remember when he started looking at the historic side of it, and he said that these replicas should be allowed. And the reason, and that wasn't with a lack of knowledge, I think the reason he said that was because he felt over a period of time that the cars were going to become too expensive. So people would maybe want to race whatever one wants to call them, let's say replicas. And I think in a lot of ways he was right. Obviously, the ultimate replica owner is the man that owns the original car.
That's the key point, isn't it?
Well, it is in a way. And I'm not saying it hasn't got out of control, but I think an important thing with a replica is to admit in what you have, which I think is in the spirit of historic racing, because I'm not wanting to win world championships. Okay, so I think as long as you say that it is, and it is correct, then it's the organiser's choice to either take that or not take that. I think the argument of, which a lot of people have, of, some of the races should be only for correct cars. It's a really difficult area, I think. And who says that these
How do you
unquestionably
police it?
correct? Yeah. So I think a lot of it sort of comes to prominence because of the driving of some of them by some people. I mean, a lot of people in historic racing think historic racing should be for historic people. I'm not one of them, but I think there needs to be, with a younger person, maybe some degree of respect, which is not easy. So it's a really big subject, Chris. But I'll talk about it. But it's sort of, for me, I think there should be, some known as correct cars and some cars, that are not correct cars. But I think to this sort of idealistic thing that a lot of people have for the cars to be what they were in their day, personally, I think is a pipe dream.
It's also impossible with modern metallurgy, materials.
Correct. Exactly.
You can't make the same engine because the metal you
Exactly.
buy is better than the metal you had then.
Exactly.
My view on it, whether it's valid or not, is that if you extrapolate some of these situations out to their logical conclusions, if you only allow real cars, in inverted commas, very soon you'll end up with no cars.
Correct.
And I want to see cars being driven. So then I ask myself sort of rhetorical questions. Does it matter to me if Frank Stippler is fully sideways in a 64 GTO through Madgwick and I'm watching it and I'm thinking that's one of the best things I've ever seen? If I stop that and freeze frame it Matrix style, does it matter to me that the car's real or not at that moment? It doesn't, actually. I'm just watching a bloke sideways in the most beautiful car that's making an amazing noise, that's just making my day better. I don't give a monkey's. Actually, if I was to care about the value of the car and whether it was real or not, it's in a macabre way, because it makes the inevitable incident when it does happen more, God, he's crashed it and it's worth 25 million quid. It always gets suffixed, doesn't it? If you see a shunt in a historic race, it's never...
It's drama, it's dramatic.
Yeah, God, that's worth as much as a street. Well, that's not a reason to want the real cars to be raced. And I just think that if you own the real car and it's worth X, you should have the right to build an absolute replica of the car. The FIA should give it a separate set of papers and a very particular identity with a big R on it or something. And as long as that car comes out and we get to see it and hear it and enjoy it, I'm happy. I really am. I think that where it becomes difficult is if we're sitting next to a real lightweight E-Type.
Correct.
There's not many of those. How many of those are there?
7.
Yeah, and that's worth what, £6-7 million pounds. If you turn up in that and you get nerfed by a bloke who's in a brilliant nuts and bolts replica of a car that's worth 300 grand, that doesn't seem fair to me. That doesn't seem like that. That's I don't know how those two. I don't know how they operate together on a grid. That's the bit I find confusing.
Yeah, it's still not the answer, though, is it?
No, no.
See, this is the big thing: is there an answer? I don't think there really, to be honest with you, is an answer.
Well, it's evolving as we speak, isn't it? At the moment.
I think it is a bit. Yeah, I think it needs maybe sometimes at historic events the right people to give driver briefings or whatever, and I don't think there is currently anyone doing that correctly or the way I feel it should be done. I mean, I think if you get maybe, I don't know, the likes of Richard Atwood or Brian Redman, who I drove with, is a wonderful guy. I mean,
Greatest living Lancastrian.
Yeah, Brian, what a fantastic guy. He'd never driven a 904 Porsche.
Are you not?
Never driven one before.
Well, the poor bloke got squeezed into a 917, didn't he?
Yeah. He got in the 904. He said, 3 pedals, steering wheel, gear stick, good enough for me. Thank you. That was it. Until he came back to drive it. He was brilliant, actually. But
his book, there's a plug out to his book. His book is fantastic.
Yes.
If you like motorsport stories,
absolutely,
from your 60s and 70s heroes, buy Brian Redman's book.
But I think it needs not a draconian attitude. I think it needs varying people with respect. That people respect, to say to a lot of the people, this is what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's important.
The mindset's interesting, isn't it? Because Goodwood, I use Goodwood as an example, but
okay.
people think Goodwood is historic racing. It isn't. It's a part of it. There are many meetings, but Goodwood seems to be the one that makes the headlines for all the right and the wrong reasons. But there's a sense that actually you're not there to race; you're there to put on a show. That's quite a particular mindset.
I think Goodwood's an example though, because it's so high profile that
they
talk about the TT grid and it being worth so much money, but those values are attributed to cars that may not be real. But when you go and do a Peter Auto race, there's just a load of guys gone down to race old cars. There's some real cars, there's some fake cars, but it's just about racing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not really about the value and if you're racing against something real.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In quite the same way as Goodwood.
I agree with that. I suppose Goodwood's quite a big subject, but, having come away from the members' meeting thinking a lot of the spirit of Goodwood is lost, I think personally they need to look at that. This whole draconian new scrutineering and just sending everyone to the back of the grid. I personally don't think it's in the spirit of historic motorsport.
Yeah.
I think what you should do is say, look, this is not correct. Let's work it out. Next time if you come, correct it. For me, that's in the spirit. So I think the replica real car is a never-ending conversation, but I think the most important thing we're talking about is the spirit. And if you want to build yourself an E-Type or a Cobra, build what is deemed to be a correct car.
Yeah.
And that is all to do with the spirit. I mean,
you know what you're doing.
Yeah, you know what you're doing. It's like when you play golf. If you want to start moving balls, or a ball's jumped out of the water amazingly and got on the fairway, if that's the way you want to do it, well, that's up to you. But really, the spirit of golf should be really the same as in historic motorsport.
You've got, and finally, I'm going to give you one circuit, one car, and 50 litres of fuel.
Mm.
And that's the last time you'll ever drive a motor car. Where'd you go? What's the car?
It's, of course, everything for me comes back to the F1, but it also, a big thing for me was driving Wolfgang Friedrich's Project 212 at Le Mans. That was, he didn't quite understand what goose pimples were and why I had them, but it was a really special moment for me. And and driving the Harrods car at Le Mans, even though in a demo, was a special thing. And I think if you're really into the spirit of it, these are the things that sort of silly to some people, but these are the things.
It needs to have a narrative. There needs to be some meaning behind it.
Correct. Yes,
you wouldn't just go to Landau in your 904 and pump it out.
No,
you might.
No.
I probably would. Yeah.
But also, I think the originality. Before I had my BRM for 15 years, and I always remember I think I did every Monaco historic, and it was completely original, apart from Hall and Hall making it raceworthy. And I remember several years ago, I saw a guy getting my car in the paddock at Monaco. And I was with Mark.
Getting in it?
Yeah, that works with me. I said, Mark, just go and get the guy out of the car. He said, David, I said, no, don't start arguing with me. I don't care who. Get the guy out of the car. He said, and it went on and on. I said, Mark, get the guy out of the car. I'm going to go and do it now. He said, look, before you go, it's Tony Brooks. And he was standing with Sterling Moss. I said, well, you should have told me that. Anyway, so I went down there. He got out of the car, Tony Brooks. I'll never forget this. He said, I want to roll up the trouser of my right leg. I said, well, you can do, yeah. So he did, and he showed me a small scar. He said, give me your finger. He said, that bit of metal under there, that is what cut my leg. He said, that's an original car. I said, thank you very much. And that was an amazing moment. Lovely, charming man. So...
That's a
Chris,
lovely.
I feel like I need to answer your question.
Go on then.
briefly, and I want to go to Spa
Right.
in a BMW LMR V12. That would be my
What, the Le Mans car?
Le Mans car, open car.
The later car.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say a Norma M20.
Well, we did that, but that didn't work very well, did
Yeah,
it?
we didn't finish
No.
that race, did we?
What would you do?
I think the purest driving experience for me is on ice or on a ice stage, an Arctic stage with snowbanks and in a rally car. I love that. That is my final driving moment. I just think the purity of driving experience, car moving around underneath you, is not to be bettered. So I'd go there.
Maybe Marco Alain in a Group 4 Integrale.
Or maybe look at this. What's next to us?
Or Stratos.
Do the full Sandro Minari.
Yeah,
David, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And
Thank
best
you.
of luck with your racing this year.
Thank you very
David.
much. Thanks very much, Edward. Thank you, Chris.